Space Marine captains are expected to fight from the front, and few kinds of armour enable them to do so as effectively as Terminator plate. In this guide, we'll be showing you how to paint this captain so he can deploy by teleport strike right into the heart of the foe. If you're new to painting, you can check out the Citadel Colour Painting Essentials videos to learn all about it. The paints we've used in this guide are listed on screen now, and we're painting in the colours of the Ultramarines. But remember, you can paint your miniatures however you like. The additional equipment we've used is also on screen now. This includes brushes and mediums. Feel free to use whatever brushes you're most comfortable with, and if you don't have mediums, you can use water instead. To start off with, we need to undercoat the model, and for this we've used Macragge Blue. This will give us a great head start on that armour. You'll also need a pot of Macragge Blue to hand, as this will help us tidy up any mistakes later on. So the first thing we're going to do is use Abaddon Black to paint the black areas. This includes the undersuit and the gun casing. This is a base paint, so we need to thin it down with some water and apply it to the miniature in a couple of thin layers. We're using a medium layer brush here, as it will give us plenty of control over the paint, and it's a little bit larger so we can paint that bit quicker. Just take your time and be careful around that armour. If you do make any mistakes, just thin down some Macragge Blue and use that to tidy back up. Now we're going to use Corax White to paint the inner cloak, the tilt plate and the shoulder pad. You'll notice that there are some red areas on the tilt plate and the shoulder pad as well. Don't worry, we'll be painting these in later. Again, Corax White is a base coat, so make sure you thin it down before you apply it. We'll need to build this up with quite a few layers. It might take around 3 to cover over that blue undercoat. We're doing this stage quite early in the guide, as when we're painting that inner cloak, we might make some mistakes, and it's easier to tidy it up now than it will be later on when we've added more details to the model. Now we're going to use Mephiston Red to paint over those red details we talked about earlier, and also the outside of the cloak. Make sure to thin your paint down and apply a couple of layers. It's easier to build up the layers rather than applying a thick coat and clogging up that detail. On the tilt plate and the shoulder pad, we're going to be doing a quartered design. And for this, we're going to start off by marking out those areas with a pencil. So you can see we're just carefully marking out roughly the areas we want to block out in the red. It doesn't have to be perfect, we'll be going back in and doing lots of tidying up later anyway. Once we're happy with the design we've created, we can then start painting in those red areas. So just thin this paint down and carefully start applying it to the model. Starting out with a really thin layer means that it's easier to tidy up. So once we've blocked in the area with a thin coat, we can then apply the extra layers. If you do find any of your lines are a bit wobbly, just cut back in with Corax White. However, you don't need to worry too much, as we'll be adding some scratches as well. This will help to mask the appearance of any wiggly lines. So when it comes to adding scratches, we're just going to thin down some Corax White and very carefully draw those scratches over those red details. You can see that we're picking them out at various angles to try and make it look quite natural. We'd advise doing this in moderation. Less is definitely more here. For marking out the areas on the shoulder pad, we're going to take the pencil and just do dotted lines. This is quite a big area, so it would be quite hard to get a neat straight line. So we can work this out when we're adding the paint in later. We just use the pencil marks as a guide. Once again, don't worry too much if your lines aren't perfect. We'll be adding scratches with Corax White, which can mask some of those mistakes. Now you can leave the shoulder pad and tilt plate as they are, but you can see that the captain has lots of personal heraldry on the box art, which will really make your miniature stand out on the battlefield. And once those details are painted in, you can see that our model is already starting to take shape. The next thing we're going to do is use Wraithbone, and we'll be painting the parchment, the teeth and the Tyranid flesh in this colour too. This is quite a pale colour, so it'll take a few coats to go over that blue undercoat. Just take your time and be as neat as you can. Being neat does save you time overall, but don't worry, mistakes can always be tidied up with the other colours. We'll be adding various shades and contrast paint to these areas later, which will help tie everything back together. You might find it easier to switch between a larger brush for the larger areas and a smaller brush for those more intricate details here. Use whatever brush you're most comfortable with. Now we can see our captain stands atop his victorious kill, so let's paint in some more of those Tyranid details. We'll be using Naggaroth Night for that Tyranid carapace. We'll also use this to pick out the Purity Seal wax, as it just adds a little bit of variety of colour to the miniature. Apply this just like you have all the other base paints, thinning them down and applying a few layers. Naggaroth Night is quite a thin paint, so again it will take a good few coats to cover over properly. Next we're going to paint the grey details using Celestra Grey. We'll be painting areas like the Crux Terminatus, the rocks and the teeth of the Tyrannid too. It's completely normal for paints to separate in the pot when you haven't used them for a while, so be sure to give them a good shake before you open them and apply them to a miniature. This is a great choice for all three of these areas, and once we've added a wash over it later, everything will really tie together nicely. Now we're going to paint the face, and we'll be using Cadian Flesh Tone for this. We're choosing to use similar colours to the box art. However, feel free to use whatever skin tone you prefer to paint your miniatures in. When we're painting faces, we really want to avoid any texture building up, as it's quite a prominent detail on the miniature. So do make sure you thin it down and apply a few layers. It may take up to 4 layers to get full coverage here. We really want to avoid clogging up any of that fine detail we can see on the face. Next we're going to paint the hair, and we've left it until now because it's a little easier to do once that skin tone is finished. So we're going to use Abaddon Black to just carefully paint in that hair. Just take your time around the skin that we've already finished. A small layer brush is likely your best choice here, as it will give you the most control of the paint on the miniature. And with that done, nearly all of our details are painted in, so now we can move on to some metallic areas. So firstly we're going to paint the silver areas of the miniature, and for this we'll be using Leadbelcher. This is a really great silver, as it will look fantastic once we've added a wash to it later. Take your time and work your way around the miniature, just picking out all those silver areas. If you're ever unsure of which areas to pick out in any colour, just refer back to the box art, or feel free to choose for yourself. This is a metallic base paint, so treat it just like the others, thin it down and apply a few layers. Just be careful that it doesn't get too watery, as you'll find that it will separate when you apply it to the miniature. Now it's time to add that gold to make this iconic ultramarine scheme. We'll be using Retributor Armour to paint in those gold details. Again, you can refer back to the box art to check where colours go, or you can choose for yourself. A medium layer brush here is a really good choice, as again, it's large enough for us to paint quite quickly and small enough that it keeps a good point and allows us to be neat. Now you can see we've just got a couple of details left unpainted, and for these we'll use Balthazar Gold. We're using this just to add some variety of colour to the miniature. And later on, we'll be using the same wash over both golds. This will tie everything together and add lots of depth and interest. And once that's done, all your base coats are done and your model is already looking awesome. Next, we're going to add some shades and contrasts and really take this paint job up a notch. So our first shade is going to be Agrax Earthshade, and we'll be using this with Lahmian Medium to achieve a couple of different effects on the miniature. To start off with, we'll thin it down, so using 1 part Lahmian Medium to 1 part Agrax Earthshade, and we'll be applying this onto the skin, the parchment and the cloth. The reason for thinning a paint down is so that it goes onto the miniature more subtly. This adds depth and also avoids overpowering the base coat. It also helps to avoid pooling on any of those flat surfaces. When you're shading the cloth, we'll be doing something called a recess shade. This means just adding the shade into the folds of the cloth. If we applied the shade all over the cloak, it would change the colour of the whole cloak, and we'd need to layer back over with Mephiston Red. So doing this just adds the depth to the recesses, which is where we want it. Then we'll take it straight from the pot and apply it to the gold areas. This includes the Retributor Armour and the Balthazar Gold details. You'll see that this adds plenty of depth and really ties everything back together. When you're applying a shade, just be careful to avoid any excess pooling. If you find this is happening, just clean off your brush and use that to soak up any excess. Now we're going to use Basilicanum Grey and Contrast Medium. So to start off with, we'll be thinning it down, so 1 part Contrast Medium to 1 part Basilicanum Grey. And we'll be using this over the silver, the grey and the purple details. Just like with the Agrax Earthshade, thinning it down means it's more subtle on the miniature and doesn't overpower those colours. It also helps to avoid tinting any of those flat surfaces. When you're applying contrast over quite large areas, apply it heavily and neatly, working in small sections. Doing this means it won't dry too quickly, as this could create lines and marks on the flat surfaces. Then we'll be taking it straight from the pot and using it as a recess shade for the armour. Work your way around the armour panels, applying it just the way you did with the cloak, just dropping the paint carefully into any of those armour panel lines. This will take a bit of time, but it actually saves us time in the long run. If we applied the shade all over the armour, we'd end up having to go back and do lots of layering back up with Macragge Blue. Doing this means we'll probably only have a couple of mistakes to tidy up. Now, it might seem unusual that we're using a contrast paint as a shade. However, when thinned down, we can use contrast paint in a variety of different ways. Basilicanum Grey has a really strong pigment, so it works really well as an armour recess shade, along with loads of different other applications. Using paints like this in multiple different ways is a great way to make the most of the paints that you've got. Now it's time to finish off that Tyranid flesh, and we'll be using Magos Purple and Contrast Medium for this. Take 1 part Contrast Medium and mix it with 1 part Magos Purple. Then apply this all over that Tyranid flesh. Again, work in small sections, applying the paint heavily and neatly. We want to avoid the paint drying out, so make sure you're quite quick with this. This is a really quick and easy way to create awesome looking Tyranid flesh. You might find you want to use a larger brush for this section, but we've stuck with a medium layer brush just to help us be that bit neater. Now your captain is more than ready to withstand all but the most devastating enemy fire. However, if you'd like to see a way to take this paint job to the next level, stick with us. So we're going to paint those gemstones that we can see. Starting off, we'll base coat them using Corax White. So thin it down and apply a couple of layers to get a full coverage. We're doing this because when we apply the next paint, that base coat will show through and create a bit of a natural highlight for us. Once that Corax White's dry, we're then going to apply a technical paint called Spirit Stone Red. This is a fantastic paint for achieving a gemstone look really quickly. We don't want to apply too thick a coat of this, as we actually want that base coat to show through. Again, this creates the illusion of a highlight. A small layer brush works best here, as they are quite intricate details. Now we're going to add a power effect to that sword. We'll be using Calgar Blue and Lamia Medium for this. So to start off with, we'll need to thin it down using 2 parts Lamia Medium and 1 part Calgar Blue. We'll then carefully drop this around the power node that we can see, and you'll see that once this starts to dry, it creates a blue glowy effect. Once that's fully dry, we'll be taking 1 part Lamia Medium to 1 part Calgar Blue, and we'll be applying this as a thinner line over the same area. This will have a slightly stronger pigment, which will mean it will be brighter and help to create that glowy effect. Once that's done, we'll add a highlight of Corax White. Just make sure you thin it down first so it's a little bit more subtle. Then just carefully pick out the power node and the raised detail. Now we're going to use Calgar Blue again as an edge highlight for the armour. You can do as much or as little edge highlighting as you want, it's really up to you. You might just want to pick out the more prominent details rather than edge highlight every single edge. When edge highlighting, it's important to get the consistency of your paint right, so make sure you thin it on your palette and test it on your palette first. We want the paint to glide nicely off the brush, and we don't want it to be too watery as it will separate when we apply it to the miniature. So work your way around the miniature using the edge of your brush and running it along any of those panel lines. Using the edge of your brush is a really quick and easy way to achieve a very neat highlight. Feel free to move the miniature around as much as you need to get the best angle for that highlight. And make sure that you've got a really stable painting position, as this will just help you to be that bit neater. If you do make any mistakes, just take some Macragge Blue and tidy back up. Just remember to thin it down first. And there we are, your captain is finished and wearing that Terminator armour with pride, ready to strike down enemies in the name of the Emperor. You can see that we've applied transfers to our model and we've also based it. We've based it using a technical paint called Armageddon Dust, and if you'd like to learn more about technical paints, you can check out our video all about them. For more tutorials, tips and tricks, you can head to your local Warhammer store where our amazing staff will be more than happy to help you, or head on over to citadelcolour.com. Well, we hope you've enjoyed the video and we'll see you next time. Bye!